21% of GDP. And then my estimate for 2005-06 is that it has become 50% of GDP. To appreciate what it means is that this year, according to the budget, our GDP will be 101 lakh crores. So we are talking about 50 lakh crores of black income generation this year. It's no chicken feed. It is a huge sum of money, and what it implies is that there's so much illegality in the system. And this results in inadequate development and failure of policies, whether at the macro level, planning, Reserve Bank of India's monetary policies, or at the micro level, whether education, health, and various other such things. And what is happening is that since the mid-70s, when the size of black economy became more than 10% of GDP, we are missing roughly 5% rate of growth. So today, Indian economy could have been a $10 trillion economy, second after the US, larger than China. We could have been an economy with about $7,000 to $8,000 per capita of income instead of about $1,200 per capita. So in other words, the development setback is enormous. And therefore, what we need to do is, we need to understand this. This graph suggests that if the black economy had not been there, we would have been along the pink graph, and because the black economy is very substantial, we have been growing along the blue graph. And that is a missed development corresponding to the black economy. So, question is, given its size, how does it function? It has to be systematic and systemic. It's not that one day I indulge in generation of black income, next day I don't do it. If I'm a sugar manufacturer, every truck leaving the sugar factory may be under-invoiced by 20%. It's not that one day I do it, next day I don't do it, 1 week I do it, next week. No, it's not like that. It is a system is built. How to bribe the excise fellow, where to bribe the sales tax person, the police, the local politicians, etc. It's a system. And that's why we find that the black economy functions as a triad which consists of the corrupt political class, the corrupt executive, and the corrupt businessmen. So in other words, today what we find is that large number of cases are coming up, whether against ministers, chief ministers, businessmen, judges, army generals, police officers, medical doctors, vice chancellors, and so on. In other words, the entire elite class of India is involved in some way or the other, which is not to say there are no honest elements left. There are indeed very many honest elements left, and that's why the system functions, but the number of the dishonest which constitute the triad is increasing very rapidly. Okay, now according to B.D. Kumar, who was the customs intelligence chief, in his book in 1990, he points out that the triad has been entered by the criminal from 1983. Why 83? Because that is when the smugglers were given amnesty. Haji Mastan and others, they got an amnesty, and since that point of time, he has tracked that actually more and more criminals are there. So either the businessman is a criminal or the politician is a criminal. And that has resulted in growing criminalization in society, in politics, and in business. The entire elite class being involved, the question is, how do you tackle illegality? And today, because of this illegality, there's huge flight of capital. Just like during the British period, there was used to be drain of wealth. According to Global Financial Integrity, in November 2010, they estimated $462 billion has gone out of the country. This is an underestimate. One of my MPhil students has recently re-estimated this figure and come to a figure of $1.1 trillion. So in other words, we have lost a huge amount of capital in the last 60 years. Now, how does this triad form? And in my book, I've discussed this. I surveyed 14 members of parliament who were successful in the 1998 elections, and because they were good friends, they gave me the actual election expenditure data. I asked them how many meetings they addressed, big and small, how many posters, how much travel expense, etc. And I've given that in my book as MP1 to MP14. Now what you find is that in this survey, the expenditure, when the expenditure limit was 15 lakh, was an average of 1.29 crores, 8 times more. And bulk of it was spent in the last 3 days in bribing, with saris and kambals and food, and also giving to vote getters who would promise you 1,000 votes or 100 votes out of the slum areas, etc. So in other words, the expenditures are illegal largely, and that's why you are not going to be able to succeed if you do this state funding of elections, and I'm going to come back to that a little later, because this is a suggestion that has been very often made, that state funding of elections is one way to reform. Now, in in my sample, there were all different political parties, including the left and the right, and so on, and across the different regions, rural, urban, etc., etc. So, the question is, politicians increasingly represent vested interests, and in my sample, politicians said that they begin day one with a lie. They know they've spent much more, but they begin by the affidavit that they have spent within the election expenditure limit. They also said, we understand that there is a quid pro quo, and it is during this, how is it financed? When I asked them, they listed corrupt bureaucrats, corrupt policemen, traders, local traders. They listed big businessmen and their big party leaders. So in other words, this triad between the corrupt system forms at the time of elections. And therefore, the people have lost faith largely in the electoral process, and people really believe that all parties are corrupt, and therefore people believe that they have no solution. And that is where honest people are not getting elected. Take a look at Arun Bhatia, who stood from Pune. He had been thrown out, and he was recalled because of the people's movement there to bring him back. And then when he stood for election, he got 50,000 votes. So there are NGOs, there are people who have done a lot of good work in their local constituencies, but they don't get elected because in a sense, people also are looking for those who will do their illegal work. So in a sense, the electoral process has been considerably damaged by this entire process. Now what it brings me to is that a law on paper, it differs from the law as it is in practice. We have wonderful laws. We have laws for all kinds of things. And I believe that no perfect law is possible. A law is a law both in letter and in spirit. If it is not followed in the spirit, human ingenuity will be enough to circumvent any situation. Today, there are huge delays in court, and that's an important reason for why people resort to illegality and they hold the law and justice in contempt. Look at Madoff's case compared to Raju's case. Raju's and Madoff's case came at the same time. Madoff's case is $50 billion. Raju's case is $2 billion. Madoff was behind bars in 6 months. Raju's case is still dragging on. So it's a huge problem there that cases take inordinately long time here as compared to in other countries, especially the US. Compare the Birkenfeld case with the Hassan Ali case. Birkenfeld case was roughly at the same time as the Hassan Ali case in 2007. Birkenfeld was prosecuted, UBS was fined $750 million, the Swiss UBS was forced to reveal 4,500 names. Look at Hassan Ali case, it was spoiled because in 2007, nothing was done. What was supposed to be $8 billion in the hard disk, later on when the finance minister had his press conference, he said only $60,000 is left, and perhaps not even that, because with a click of mouse, you can take the thing. So in other words, what is happening is that cases are deliberately spoiled by the prosecution. In Birkenfeld's case, how did they track? Mr. Birkenfeld was going back and forth between Zurich and New York. And that is what IRS tracked. They tracked where he was going. So from small amount of information, they built a huge case. In India, when you get large amount of information, prosecution spoils the cases. And therefore, there's a problem. So delays are engineered by the system, bringing law into contempt, and that is a major problem that we face today. Okay, remedies. What has not worked? We've had dozens of committees and commissions since 1947. It's not one or two. We had a committee in 48, we had the Caldo committee in 55, 56, we had the Santanam committee, Banchu committee, Dagli committee, P.C. Alexander committee, Yakesh Anand committee. I can reveal any number of this. They are listed in my book. They made thousands of suggestions. It's not 1, 2, 5, 10. We know what's to be done. We've implemented hundreds and hundreds of them. For instance, voluntary disclosure scheme, lower taxes, reduction of controls, demonetization currency in 77. We've tried all kinds of things. Hundreds of things have been tried. The size of black economy is continuing to grow. So, what is to be done? It's not that nothing can be done, but the question is, where will we get the political will to actually do what is required to be done? As Mr. Rao has listed various things, the question again comes, how do we develop that will? Current spate of measures, the government has announced 3 committees, government has announced double taxation avoidance agreement with 76 countries, tax information exchange agreement with 17 countries. But double taxation avoidance agreement is about white incomes, not about black incomes, an income that you have not revealed. How will double taxation avoidance agreement come about it? If your money in a Swiss bank account is through some shell company, you're not the beneficiary. Even if you get the information about that account, who's the real beneficiary, you don't know. So therefore, these are mere palliative. They are to assuage the public is upset, and therefore it's a measure to assuage the public as to what is to be done. Okay, what may work? We need accountability in the systems all around, which is said by everyone. But the question is, how do we build accountability? Okay? There are no shortcuts. They are all very impatient. They all want something to be done. But there are no shortcuts, there are no quick fixes. to solve the problem of black economy. Otherwise, with the hundreds of measures that we've adopted in the last 60 years, the problem would have been solved. It's not going to work as a quick fix. The question is, democracy is weak. Everything that Mr. Rao said suggests that our democracy is very weak. Okay? The difference between political parties is that between Tweedledee and Tweedledum. If you have in Punjab, the Akali Dal or the Congress, they each accuse each other. You have a DMK and Anna DMK in Tamil Nadu. You have Congress party and the TDP in Andhra Pradesh. Everybody accuses the other and does more of the same. So that's not going to work. Okay. Now, if leadership has a feudal mindset and parties are like property, as Mr. Rao said, progeny gets the party, and therefore nobody else can speak. State funding will not work. Why? Because bulk of the expenditure is on illegal activity. And if it's on illegal activity, you need illegal funds. Out of what funds you get from the state, you will not be able to do the illegal expenses. So this will be only a small additionality to whatever fund you get. And therefore, in a sense, what I'd say is that if a leader facing prosecution can put his wife in his own position, then why would he worry about democracy? Democracy gets undermined. So democracy undermined is the main aspect that we have to focus on. So what we need to really do is look at the challenge before the legal fraternity from the point of view of the wider, in the sense of how to strengthen democracy. It's not that simply by having more laws or by refining the laws, we'll be able to solve the problem. We have to think of the political process. And after all, many of the suggestions that are coming are about the political process. They're not about having more laws. And the question is, how do we bring accountability in the judicial process itself? I've seen a case in which within 2.5 years in the High Court, 8 judges saw the case. Every 3 months there would be a new judge. And 7 judges did not hear. There was a postponement. Only the 8th judge heard it, and that day the judgment was given. Right? So why was this case there for 2.5 to 3 years? Just because judges were not accountable to anybody. They were accountable to their own conscience. How does one bring about judicial accountability? I think is a very key thing. And that coupled with electoral reform, where the democratic processes are strengthened, and I think these two are crucial. Without this, any suggestions we make, any changes we make, we'll have more of the same. And let's not believe that people say in the JP movement or earlier weren't concerned about corruption, weren't concerned about the problems. After all, Ayaram Gayaram problem started in '67 in Haryana. Okay, we've been grappling with that and haven't found a solution for that. Because the solution lies in the democratic process. And I think I've taken too much time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prashant. We have had some wonderful presentations. A lot of suggestions have been given and many thoughts have also been thrown up. The floor is open for questions. Please identify yourself and also indicate the person whom you want to answer that question. So let's have a few questions from the audience. We'll have about 15 or 20 minutes for that. Yes? Yes, please. That's what it is.
I'm an advocate practicing in the Supreme Court. My question is, even the judges, the courts are readily granting stay of sentences to the candidates who want to contest election. And they get elected, they complete their term in the parliament or the assembly. And then that stay order continues even after that. What do we do about this?
Mike?
Yeah, okay.
Look, it all depends on the facts of each case. It's not in every case the stay is granted. If granted, the stay should not be granted. Of course, today the tendency is not to grant stay readily. So, judges differ, the temperament differs, the outlook differs. So this is not a thing which you can really codify into a law and say stay should not be granted. It's the judicial philosophy of the judge trying the case, and that's the inference of the facts of the case and the gravity of the offence.
But sir, in majority of the cases we have seen that stay is granted. Past experience has been that.
Sorry? Just a minute, please answering. Yes?
So what I was saying is, it's our experience over the period that in majority of these kind of cases, we find that the judges grant stay.
Which high court are you talking about?
Sir, I am not talking about the High Court, I am not talking about the entire judicial system. Because they find something important to be considered in the matter and stay is granted.
Then I think we'll have another session for judicial reforms, okay?
Yakesh Anand. I'm practicing in Supreme Court since 1980. I'm asking this question, is it not possible that political parties are banned from taking any donation save and except against a valid receipt, and unless the donor identify himself by way of his identity card or something? One. And second, is it not possible to ban the political parties to canvass? The candidates should be known by their social work and standing in the society, like of lawyers, doctors, they are prohibited from canvassing, rather than allowing them to canvass and create nuisance in the society. And my question is, to anyone on the dais who would like to react.
But you mean to say the identity should be known? Yes. So these donors who gave to Mahavati, the hundreds of them, they should be identified
and go away with somebody has put it in the box.
How you implement it.
So it's like how to record transactions. Can I record that? How to detect it?
So that the money
I just wanted to add this thing caveat. It's not that we should not do what you're saying, but after all, when corporations generate black income, they're also supposed to be having a balance sheet where everything's supposed, but they generate off the balance sheet. So donations come, and I know in Delhi, for instance, at the time of election, there are houses, safe houses, where there are counting machines, because so much cash is coming in, and that's nothing to be recorded. So in other words, how do you check that? That becomes a major problem.
Actually, what I mean to say
The second question is about the credentials of the candidates, etc. It is very necessary. There should be some conditions of eligibility laid down, either for contesting parliament or for ministership, etc. That's a lacuna in the constitution which is being exploited now. It is necessary to have a provision and also implement it.
In fact, my question is that they should be prohibited from canvassing and creating a nuisance in the society. The politicians should be known by their qualification and standing and social work they do for the society, not by simple canvassing. Is it not possible to ban canvassing?
So many things are possible which have been spoken about, but all this would require some law and some legal sanction to enforce it, and those who have a vested interest in the status quo won't. That's why we have to think of an action plan where you can compel them to do their duty or devise ways and means. And some suggestions made that, you see, adopt the judicial route wherever possible, because after all in this body of, try to build public pressure, try the judicial route. So those are the ways to do it.
If I am Advocate Manoj Shirsak from Bombay High Court, may I add with the diocese permission a few lines? I will again quote Mr. Addl Vajpayee, but the Vajpayee as a poet. So in his famous poem, he narrate the Indian polity on the background of Mahabharata. He said कि कौन कौरव कौन पांडव टेढ़ा सवाल है, चारों ओर शकुनी का फैला फूट जाल है, धर्मराज ने छोड़ी नहीं जुए की लत है, हर पंचायत में पांचाली अपमानित है, बिना कृष्ण के, कृष्ण is supposed to be the personification of rule of law and justice, बिना कृष्ण के आज महाभारत होना है, कोई बने राजा रंक को तो रोना है. So he was a bit cynical in evaluating the polity. So whoever may be looking, the poor is always been in distress. So my question on this, the preface is, are we not going too cynical in evaluating our parliament or our electorate? We have a very balanced electorate throughout the years of democracy. So my question to the dais is, are we not going too cynical when we are saying that everything is bad?